I found a CEO who had lost his memory once, and I lied that he was my husband. I am Lily Hart, a scholarship student from the snowy mountains of Montana, and today I can barely breathe. Hello everyone. Before we start today's story, I have a small request. Please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video on our channel. Your support means a lot to us. Where are you watching from? Leave your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. The auditorium at Columbia University is too bright, too polished, too far from the quiet life I came from. Everyone around me wears confidence like perfume. On the stage stands Lucas Cole, the man who sponsors this scholarship, the man whose name fills every news headline about success and fortune. To everyone else, he is the image of perfection. To me, he is someone I used to know. He speaks calmly, his voice smooth and steady, like he's practiced it 1,000 times. The way he moves, controlled, deliberate, reminds me how different our worlds have become. His dark suit fits him like a promise that only wealth can afford. Every word he says earns applause, but I can't hear any of it. My heart keeps thudding in my ears, drowning out his speech. I shouldn't even be here. I should be one of the students smiling gratefully, nodding politely, pretending this moment doesn't sting, but I can't stop looking at him. He's right there, so close, yet completely unreachable. When he adjusts the microphone, his sleeve shifts slightly, revealing a tattoo on his wrist. The letter L. My chest tightens before I can stop it. Lauren Gray. That name has followed him for years. His childhood friend, the daughter of another powerful family. The woman everyone believes he will marry. It makes sense. They fit perfectly. Heir to heir, elegance to elegance. I press my hands together to keep them still. The crowd laughs at something he says, but I can't bring myself to join. My throat feels heavy, and the air around me blurs with noise and light. He finishes his speech, smiling faintly as flashes go off from every angle. When he leaves the stage, people rush forward to shake his hand, to take photos, to touch the brilliance that surrounds him. I stay in my seat, quiet and invisible, clutching the folder that carries his signature. The same one that paid for my future. As the room empties, I remain for a moment longer, staring at the spot where he stood. My eyes sting, but I blink it away. There's no reason to feel anything. He's just a name on a scholarship form, a man from another life. Nothing more. The storm that night came down like punishment. Wind clawed at the roof, snow piling against the door until it groaned. I was checking the woodpile when the lantern caught something twisted in the ditch, a dented truck door, shards of glass, and a man lying motionless beside it. He wasn't dead. His breath steamed faintly in the cold, each exhale thin as smoke. I don't remember deciding to help him. I just moved. I dragged him through the snow, the ice biting into my fingers, until we reached the cabin. My mother's coughing stopped when she saw him, her eyes wide but too tired to speak. By the time the fire burned high enough to fight the cold, his eyelids twitched. When he woke, confusion swam in his eyes like something trapped beneath the surface. "What's your name?" I asked. He hesitated, pressing a hand to his temple. "Eli," he murmured after a long silence, as if he were inventing the word right there. Nothing else followed. He stayed because he had nowhere else to go, and I let him. He split wood, repaired the roof, and kept the stove alive when the nights turned cruel. The neighbors in town whispered about the stranger living with me and my sick mother, but he ignored them. He carried the water, the heavy logs, the silence. He was quiet most of the time, gentle in the way he handled things, like the cracked cups or my mother's frail hands. I started leaving an extra plate on the table without thinking. One evening, when the snowstorm locked us in for 2 days straight, I joked to make the air lighter. "You're my husband now," I said, teasing him over a bowl of soup that barely tasted of anything. He looked at me as though he was taking the words as truth. "Then I should call you wife," he replied seriously. The next morning he did, and the morning after that. Every time he said it, I pretended to be annoyed, but my heart answered before my mouth could. He owned only one thing from the life he couldn't remember. A silver watch with initials I didn't recognize. When my mother's medicine ran out, I found the watch missing. He returned later with her pills, his hands cold and empty. "It wasn't worth much," he said simply, smiling in that small, uncertain way of his. The snow outside pressed against the windows, but the cabin felt warmer than it ever had before. The snow had started to melt, but the air still carried winter in its bones. Life inside our cabin had begun to feel almost normal. Eli fixing the roof while I cooked, my mother smiling more than she had in months. I thought maybe, just maybe, the world was giving me a little mercy. Then she came. Her car stopped at the gate like a piece of glass dropped into mud. Too clean, too bright for a place like ours. She stepped out wearing a white coat that never touched the dirt. Her name was Lauren Gray, and the moment she said it, I knew she didn't belong to the same kind of life we did. She smiled politely when I opened the door, but her eyes swept the cabin as if she were measuring what didn't fit. "I'm looking for someone," she said smoothly. "Lucas Cole. He went missing here months ago." I turned toward the yard. Eli had stopped stacking wood. He looked at her, startled, then back at me. "Lucas?" he repeated quietly, as though the name had weight. Lauren stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the smell of pine smoke. "You are Lucas Cole," she said firmly. "You're the son of the chairman of Cole Enterprises. You had an accident, but you're needed back in New York. Your family has been searching for you." The silence that followed was too heavy to breathe through. My mother's coughing broke it for a moment, weak and distant from her room. I saw the confusion in Eli's, Lucas's eyes, the disbelief, the way his fingers curled like he needed something to hold on to. She spoke again, softer now. "And I'm your fiancé." The words hung in the air like frost. I didn't know where to look. At her, or at him. He stood frozen, eyes flicking between us. I tried to smile, to act like I understood, but my chest felt hollow. He didn't leave that day. For 2 nights he stayed restless, pacing by the fire, silent through dinner. Every time I asked what he was thinking, he only said, "I don't know." Then, on the 3rd morning, I woke to find the door open and the cold blowing in. The chair by the fire was empty. On the table sat an envelope with my name, thick and heavy. Inside was money, more than I'd ever seen. No note, no explanation. My knees went weak. I waited for hours, then days. He never came back. I told myself he must have remembered who he was, that he had simply realized what I was. Not his wife, not his equal, just a poor girl from the mountains. 2 days later, my mother passed away. I buried her alone in the frozen ground, sold what little we had left, and boarded a bus to New York. I changed my last name and promised myself never to look back. Fate must have a strange sense of humor. 3 years after that winter, I saw him again. In a city that never forgives weakness. He was no longer the man I'd known, and I was no longer the girl who waited by a frozen door. Now, he was Lucas Cole, the name that filled the headlines, and I was just a scholarship student who worked nights to afford rent. When I first saw his face again on the news, his hand shaking the mayor's, I had laughed quietly, asking whatever God was listening why he loved playing cruel jokes. But rent didn't pay itself. No matter how much my stomach twisted, I still had to show up at the restaurant in Midtown Manhattan where I waited tables. The uniforms smelled faintly of bleach, and the tips depended on smiles I barely had the strength to fake. That night felt like every other, until my manager, who usually watched me like a hawk, suddenly softened his tone. "There's someone in the private room who asked for you," he said. My heart stumbled. "Me?" He nodded, pushing a strand of hair behind his ear. "Yes. Don't keep them waiting." I carried the tray down the corridor, palms sweating, telling myself it was just another demanding guest. When I opened the door, the air seemed to stop moving. He was there. Lucas. Sitting alone beneath the low light, a glass of untouched wine before him. His eyes lifted, calm but sharp, and for a moment neither of us spoke. I could tell he'd recognized me. There was no surprise, only distance. "You're still working hard," he said finally, his voice measured, polite, cruel in its restraint. "I do what I must," I answered, forcing my hands to stay steady. He leaned back in his chair. "If you need money," he said coldly, "sleep with me for 1 night. Name your price." The sound of the slap echoed before I even realized I'd moved. "Is that what you think of me?" I asked, my voice shaking. His jaw tightened, eyes dark. He struck the edge of the table, the wine glass fell and porcelain shattered. Blood slipped from his hand, streaking down to that same tattoo, L. "That's not what you wanted?" He sneered softly. "It was 3 years ago, and it's still the same now." I stared at him, the anger breaking through the ache. "You left without a word," I said quietly. "I did what I had to do to survive. Is that a sin to you?" For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a strange calm, he rose and adjusted his sleeve. "Come to Cole Enterprises," he said. "I'll pay you 3 times what you make here." And before I could answer, he was gone. 2 weeks later, I stepped into the glass tower of Cole Enterprises as an intern. My hands trembled when I clipped the ID badge to my blouse, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. The building smelled of polished marble and ambition. Every surface gleamed, and every voice seemed to know exactly where it belonged. I didn't, but somehow things were easier than I expected. The morning after my first day, a cup of coffee appeared on my desk. Black, 1 sugar, exactly how I drank it. The next day, it was there again, and again after that. No one ever said who left it, but I didn't need to ask. From the corner of my eye, I sometimes caught a shadow moving behind the smoked glass walls of the executive floor. When I looked up, the reflection would vanish, but I always felt it. Someone watching. Quietly. Carefully. The days turned into weeks. Whenever a problem seemed impossible, a file I couldn't access, a client too difficult, someone always stepped in at the right time. The senior manager, who rarely spoke to interns, started offering advice with unexpected patience. It didn't take long to realize whose influence made that possible. At first, I told myself to ignore it, to keep my head down and treat every kindness as coincidence. But little by little, my defenses thinned. I stopped flinching when someone said his name. I even started to look up at the top floor sometimes, wondering if he was there. One evening, after a long shift, I left the office past 9. The streets of Manhattan were slick with rain, neon lights bleeding into puddles. I heard footsteps behind me, steady, matching mine. I turned, no one. But when I crossed the next block, the sound came again, closer. My pulse quickened. I pulled my coat tighter and quickened my pace. But before I could reach the subway stairs, a hand caught my arm. "Let go," I shouted, but the man's grip tightened. Then suddenly he was gone, jerked backward by another figure. The man hit the pavement hard, a dull thud echoing under the streetlight. Lucas stood between us, his expression sharper than I'd ever seen it. He didn't say a word as the stranger stumbled away, clutching his ribs. I couldn't move. My heart was still racing when he turned to me. "You're safe now," he said quietly. He saw the tears I hadn't realized were falling and stepped closer, his voice softer. "You shouldn't walk alone this late." Before I could protest, he took my hand and led me to his car. The city blurred past as he drove. I didn't ask where we were going. When the car stopped, I recognized the place from the skyline, the tall apartment overlooking the Hudson. "Stay here tonight," he said. "You need rest." I wanted to argue, but the exhaustion won. For the first time in years, I let someone else take care of me. A few weeks after that night, the city woke to scandal. The morning papers screamed the same headline. Gray construction under investigation. Tax fraud and illegal projects exposed. I read it twice before the words settled into meaning. Every asset frozen, every executive detained, and Lauren Gray, the daughter of the empire, had fled to France on a midnight flight under the excuse of studying abroad. My fingers tightened around the newspaper. The ink smudged beneath my thumb. A chill crawled down my back that had nothing to do with the draft from the window. Lauren Gray. The same woman who had come to that cabin 3 years ago. The one who'd taken him away. When Lucas came home that evening, I waited by the window with the paper folded neatly on the table. The city lights cast his face in soft gold when he stepped in, removing his coat as if he could sense the questions waiting for him. "Was this you?" I asked quietly. He paused mid-motion, glanced at the headline, and then at me. For a long time he didn't speak. Then with a sigh, he sat down across from me. "You deserve to know everything." I held my breath. "When I came back to New York," he began, "they treated me for the memory loss. It didn't take long before everything returned. The accident, the mountain, you." His voice faltered. "I found out the crash wasn't an accident. My half-brother arranged it to remove me from the company. Lauren knew and helped cover it." He rubbed his hands together slowly. "When I left that envelope on your table, I thought you had kept me because of who I was, because of money. I believed her lies, and I hated myself for believing them." His eyes met mine, steady and unguarded. "I went back to Montana once, but you were gone. No records, no address. It was like you'd vanished into air. I told myself it was what you wanted." I swallowed hard, unable to answer. "Then, months ago at that scholarship ceremony, I saw you in the crowd," he said, his voice softening. "I didn't trust my own eyes. You looked so distant. When you rejected me, I realized something was wrong, something I hadn't understood, so I started digging. I found what Lauren had done, the recordings, the manipulation. She used me, used you, to protect her family's interests." He hesitated, then added, "When she learned you were back, she tried to have you frightened off. That man who followed you, he wasn't random. I made sure they won't touch you again. Lauren won't be returning to New York." He rolled up his sleeve slightly, revealing the familiar mark on his wrist. "This L, it's not for her. It's for you, Lily." The words broke something open inside me. My eyes blurred as I reached across the table. "You should have trusted me," I whispered. "I know," he said, voice shaking. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for that." Snow began to fall beyond the window, soft and slow. I stepped into his arms, and for the first time in 3 years, neither of us had to pretend we weren't still holding on. Winter returned quietly, soft as breath on glass. The city lights faded behind me as the bus climbed into the white arms of Montana. 3 years had passed since the night I first dragged a stranger from the snow. Now I was coming back, not as the scared girl who once counted pennies, but as a teacher working with a charity project funded by Cole Enterprises. Life had circled in on itself in the gentlest way. The cold here was different, cleaner somehow. The wind carried memories instead of noise. Children's laughter echoed from the schoolhouse we'd built with grant money, the one with windows that actually closed against the storm. I stayed after class to lock up, the key trembling slightly between my fingers. The road stretched ahead, blank and silver under the moon. As I walked, I saw a figure sitting in the snowbank near the pine line, still and calm, as though he'd been waiting there all along. Lucas. He sat cross-legged, coat dusted with white, a half-smile playing on his lips. For a moment I couldn't move. The air between us shimmered with something too full for words. "You'll freeze out here," I called. He looked up, that same easy grin I remembered from years ago lighting his face. Maybe I was waiting for someone to warm me up. I laughed through the lump in my throat and shook my head. "You're such a fool, Lucas Cole." He stood, brushing the snow from his coat, and stepped toward me. I met him halfway. The mountains around us were silent witnesses, the kind that never needed to speak. He reached for my hand, his fingers cold and familiar. "Let's go home," I whispered. We walked back to the cabin together. It had been repaired since those early winters. New roof, new paint. But the same heartbeat still lived in its wooden walls. Inside, the fire crackled to life, as if it had been waiting too. That night, we sat by the window watching the snow fall, slow and endless. When he leaned forward to kiss me, the world outside blurred into nothing but white. Time stopped needing to move. 2 years later, we married quietly in the Valley Church. No cameras, no headlines, just a handful of friends, a piano, and vows whispered under candlelight. We moved back to the same cabin, trading skyscrapers for sky. Every morning we shared noodles for breakfast while steam curled through the light like soft ribbons. Every evening we sat by the window until the sun sank behind the hills. And sometimes, when the fire burned low, I'd rest my head on his shoulder and remember the question I once asked myself. What is home? Home is this. The space between two people who keep choosing each other from sunrise to sunset, over and over again.